Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Unlimited. Today, we are talking about making decisions I can trust. Last episode, we looked at getting out of your own way, and it was a coaching episode, and we touched a lot on this idea of discernment and trusting yourself to make a good decision, and that idea of self-trust. I'm excited to report that I did check in with the woman who I coached in that episode. And since our session, she has stepped into a new opportunity that she's been feeling called to for a while, but had been resisting. And while it is stretching her comfort zone a bit, she's also extremely excited to dive in. So that is something that I would love for all of you. And one of the things that blocks this is that sense of, can I make good decisions? And I realized that while we did some coaching around that, it was really worth digging in. It's an area that I'm super passionate about. It's an area that I've had a variety of approaches to in my life, both from the idea of group discernment through my childhood and practice in the Religious Society of Friends, i.e. Quakers, and that idea of listening deeply and coming to beyond consensus, but like a clear sense of the next step forward, as well as my training in mediation. And then, of course, my coach training, which is all about helping you make decisions that fit you so that you can move forward, right? So anyway, all of that, I really wanted to dig in. Now, I have had several episodes where we have dug into aspects of this, and it's certainly come up. So if this is something you want to dig into further, I will have links to some of the episodes that I think are particularly pertinent. But what we're going to look at in this episode is really exploring what are the blocks to clarity. And the things that, like, so many people come to me and they're like, I'm not sure. I would like more clarity around this. Well, what's stopping clarity? Because this is not unusual. This is something that we all experience. So what stops clarity? What do we think stops clarity that maybe actually, or is the solution? What do you think is the solution, or what are we told is the solution to that block that may actually be more harmful than helpful? And then ways that you can refine, hone in on your decision-making ability so that you feel more comfortable and confident making decisions. This is something that, even though I have all this background that I just went over, I have struggled with a great deal in my life for a good chunk of my life. And it's only been in the past decade or so that I've become more comfortable with the idea of making decisions. And some of these blocks are things that I've very much had to work through myself. And there are things that come up with clients a lot. So I think it deserves some specific attention. So without further ado, let's get started. Hey there, I'm Valerie Friedlander, Certified Life Business Alignment Coach, and this is Unlimited. This podcast bridges the individual and the societal, scientific and spiritual, positive and negative, nerdy and no, there's just a lot of nerdy. Come on board and let's unlock a life that's as badass as you are. As we start talking about making decisions that you can trust, the first piece that we really need to explore is clarity and blocks to clarity. We talked about this in the last episode when the client I was working with was saying, well, I don't feel clear and I want to see the big picture so that I know the right thing to do because I'm afraid of the gray area. I'm afraid of this not knowing. And that actually is one of the first big blocks to clarity is not defining clarity and wanting clarity to be knowing the right answer, knowing the whole thing. Like I want to be clear on the big picture and the right way to do it, which is like that idea of our life as a labyrinth and there's only one right way through it, or this activity is the right and wrong way to do it. And so that binary thinking, that there is a right and wrong way. And we engaged that in the last episode. She's like, I can't screw this up. Like, I can't do this wrong because this is my life. And each piece of it is important. And so that's one of the first blocks is what does it mean to be clear? So you'll notice within my coaching episodes, the first thing I ask is, if I gave you a magic wand and there was a magical result from this session, what would you say had happened? And then when that answer is there, and usually there's something around clarity, right? The next thing is, well, if you had that thing, if that thing happened, what would be different? And that's the next piece. So like knowing, what do you want? What's the magical thing that you want to have happen? And then like, what would that change about your life? What would be different? And if you dig in a little bit deeper, oftentimes that's where the idea is. That's where the magic is. Because if we don't know that definition of what we're going for, we can't achieve it. And it's not the external thing. It's not even just like clarity. It's, what is clarity going to do for you? And oftentimes it's, well, I'll feel more confident in taking action. Okay, well, that comes with taking action and building that self-trust. Going back to, I can't make any mistakes. I can only build off of that. There are lots of things in our society that erode our self-trust. And that would be the next block to clarity and the ability to make decisions, because clarity being that next right step. So if our self-trust has been eroded, it's going to be very hard to make decisions that you can trust. And there's all kinds of things we could talk about: capitalism, the education system, parenting styles, religion, anything ultimately within this that has a mediated relationship with what is right, that someone else has the right answer, be it the marketers, be it the teachers, be it the parents, whatever. And we talk a lot about this in episode 17, Learning to Trust Ourselves. That was an interview with Shelley Robinson of raising ourselves and rebuilding that sense that, oh, I can make decisions, and learning to trust ourselves. So that eroded self-trust that you can make good decisions is something that builds on itself. So oftentimes if we don't trust ourselves to make good decisions, then we don't make decisions, or we let other people make decisions. We look to other people to have the answers. And then when they don't fit, we go, oh, well, see, I can't make good decisions. And so it's this feedback loop that builds on itself. So that fear of failure is something else that blocks clarity. And fear of failure can also be fear of success. As we talked about in the last episode, if you're afraid that by being successful, you will ultimately fail, you will ultimately not have what you want. And often, again, this is something that's not a conscious thing that's playing in your brain. It's playing in the background of, I don't know who I will be if I have this, or I have these subconscious ideas about what people who have these things are like, and I don't actually want to be like them. And so I'm afraid of achieving the thing that I want to achieve because I don't want to be what my subconscious imagination thinks I will be like. So really honing into whatever that is, because if you are afraid that you will discover something that is painful, be it that you're really not good enough, you really can't, that you'll lose something that's important to you. And that does happen. We do have losses and grief as we grow and change. But when we're not aware of that, when it's a surprise, when all of those things, it can be a big fear and it can be a block. The other piece is interpretations of past experiences through that lens of what was emotionally painful, which then equates to bad, which then leads to trying to avoid mistakes because mistakes are painful, therefore they are bad, versus using that hindsight to affirm a perspective that actually I can't make mistakes. Each choice has brought me new growth and moving forward. So how have those things helped you move forward? Just like in Captain Marvel, where she looks back and she's that mediated relationship of the higher being or whatever it was that said, oh, look at all these places where you're not good enough, where you fell down and you can't do it. And she's like, no, actually, like, look at all these places where I got back up. Looking for the places and interpreting those past experiences, which your brain will automatically do if it was painful, being able to consciously go back in and go, actually, how did I grow from that? What did I learn from that? Or maybe if it's been a series and a chain of events, like we talked about just a minute ago, where it feeds on itself. And so now you're in this place where you see each of those choices or lack of choices leading to where you are now, and you don't like where you are now, going, what do I want to take from it? How do I want to grow from it? Just like what we talked about in the last episode of like, what do you want to do with this information? How do you want to move forward? You always have that opportunity. So what can I take from that experience? What do I choose to take from that experience? And then negative self-bias. If you exist within a society that has stereotypes that are negative, engaging those takes energy. Whether you've internalized them, and so like those are playing in your subconscious, which is something that happens to most of us at some level, and then trigger a fear that others might judge you because of that negative stereotype that either you're aware of or you're not aware of. Either way, that fear, if it's playing, takes energy. And then any situation that reminds you of that negative bias takes energy. So dealing with those negative stereotypes drains your cognitive resources. So it does take more energy. So recognizing that it takes more energy is important. And the spaces that you're in are important, which ties then into survival mode. Lack of resources, be they time resources, money resources, and just energetic resources, reduces the space that you have to see options, to see choices. And it can create a weightier decision-making process. So it means that the decisions can seem bigger. Sometimes they seem bigger and they're not actually. It's just a programming. So for example, growing up, there was a lot of stress around money in my home. And so those decisions seemed big. And I picked up on that energy. So as an adult, I would freeze up around decisions. It took a lot of work to pull out of the experience that my decisions were life or death decisions. I wasn't thinking of them that way, but I was experiencing them that way. Decisions seemed heavy. They seemed big. Now, knowing what your values are and what's important can help you with those decisions. So, for example, if you don't have a lot of money and you're planning on eating out and doing something special, and you don't do this very often, it can feel like a bigger decision. Like, what are we going to get? I want to make sure that we get the right thing. Knowing what is important to you about that experience can help you make a decision. Is it the adventure of eating out? Well, maybe you go with something new. Even if it's not your favorite food, it'll be an interesting conversation to explore what that's going to be like. Or maybe it's to feel comfy and warm and pampered. And so maybe you go with something that is tried and true that you know will create that experience for you. With all of these things that block clarity, be it the definition of clarity or whether it's, I want the big picture, I want the whole thing that I can't actually see, binary thinking, eroded self-trust, fear of success, fear of failure, fear of loss, negative self-bias, interpretations of past mistakes, survival mode, any of those things result in an avoidance of clarity, because clarity means making a decision. And, if you're waiting for clarity to make a decision and the decision seems big and scary and has danger written all over it, at least in your subconscious's perspective, then you're going to avoid it. That's a normal reaction to that. So we often think we're looking for clarity because clarity is the thing that's blocking the decision, when really what we don't want is to make the decision, because the decision is scary. Most of the decisions that are really harmful in our life and to our self-trust are the ones that we didn't make. the ones that we defaulted into. I do also want to recognize, along the lines of the energy component, is that conscious decisions take work from your frontal cortex. And work from your frontal cortex takes more energy. So going back to that idea of how much energy do you have, the more work that your frontal cortex feels like it's making, the more you are going to try and avoid making decisions. This is that idea of decision fatigue. And I also want to say that not making decisions isn't necessarily bad. Sometimes we need to not make decisions, and being able to set yourself up for making less decisions can be really helpful, right? Like, I think I talked about this in the Ideal Day episode, where the more things that you can turn into a routine, the less energy you're having to spend, and therefore it makes it easier. But you want to have room for the important decisions, the weightier decisions. You want to have room to be able to see options and explore what's true for you, what's true in the world, and how you want to engage that. And so by not making those decisions that actually are important, then we harm our self-trust, because we get into that feedback loop of not making a decision that we feel like, well, we didn't actually make that decision, so then life's happening to us. And that sense of life happening to us, which is essentially victim mode. I don't like to use that because there's so much stigma around the idea of being a victim. Nobody wants to say, oh, I'm a victim. I feel like a victim. Nobody wants to say that. Like, I'm choosing it. But it is that sense that life's happening to you in places where you might have more power than you realize, or at least options. You have choices. And recognizing where you do actually have choices helps create a greater sense of control in your life and empowerment in your life. This brings me to a twofold aspect of coaching. So coaching can be really helpful in this, because so many of these things are like labels that we wear on our forehead. If you've ever played the game where you put a label, maybe it's like a person or an animal or something, you put that on your forehead and you walk around it and you try and figure out what the label is that you're wearing. And other people can see it, and you ask them questions, and by their responses, you start to figure out what the label is on your forehead. But gosh, wouldn't it be easier if somebody held up a mirror? Like, that would be way easier. That would be way faster. Now, will you eventually figure out what that label is and whether you want to wear it or whether you want a different one or whatever, or maybe, write a new one? Like, yes, you could do that, but it will take longer. It just will. And we're not just wearing one label. We're wearing like lots of labels. These are the beliefs that we have about ourselves, our identity, all of those things. So coaching can help us see the label, can help identify what do you want that label to say, changing it. So like holding up that mirror and going, okay, what do you see? What does that mean to you? What does that word mean to you? And then what do you want it to be like? And accessing those choices, being able to lead with who you want to be versus the fears of who you might be. Because, if you're walking around and you think there might be a label on your forehead that you don't like, you might avoid that. Any place where you're avoiding is losing energy. It's losing choice. It's losing options. And so that fear of, oh, well, what if that label says you're a bad person? So being able to develop clarity in that decision making, being able to build trust in your decision making is really important. And that's what coaching is so great at, or at least it can be, is when you're working with someone who is affirming your own self-trust, taking it out of that mediated relationship with the right thing and helping you reclaim that relationship. Before I dig too much into how you can develop trust in your own decision-making and some of those components that I just touched on, I also want to acknowledge why the coaching industry can be so harmful, because there are a lot of places where what is called coaching, or what people say I'm a coach, are doing is actually taking over that role of being the mediator of the relationship with what I will call for right now, the truth, what is right. And a lot of times people who are doing this don't realize that that's what they're doing. They really care about you. They really want to help. And so you may pick up on that energy of, I really want to help. But what happens is that they're playing into the same dynamic of there being kind of a hierarchy of awareness, of knowledge. And so any of those things where someone is selling you through your fears, it's setting up a power dynamic. Like, I have the answers for you. I want to help you. I want to get you to do the right thing. Coaches, no one, as I mentioned before, because everybody has different experiences, they cannot tell you what should and shouldn't be a weighty decision for you. They can't tell you what your experience is right now because they are not you. And they can't tell you what the right decision for you is. Now, they may have a strategy. They can't tell you that that's the right strategy for you. And a lot of times that's something that comes up too. And I do want to acknowledge here that this can be true for therapy too. A lot of people who love helping other people fall into a pattern of force helping, or helping by weakening someone else. So any of those, like, you have to do it this way. Some of the things that coaches will say that play on this, that you can identify are falling into this dynamic, are things like telling you that you're ready for what they have to offer. Again, there's that mediated dynamic of, I know what's best for you. I know the right thing for you. And this happens with parents too. So I do want to call this out of, like, this is the right thing. Well, who is it the right thing for? How do you know it's the right thing? Now, I will say within this that sometimes we don't feel ready. Like, what ready feels like. And actually, this is this is another place to explore of, like, what does ready feel like? What would be different for you if you felt ready? How would you know that you're ready? Those are the things that, if you're working with somebody who is really invested in you developing your relationship with yourself versus them being the one to give you answers, they're going to ask you those kinds of questions to help you learn to tap into your own awareness, your own power within yourself, and not being attached to that. It has to be with me. It has to be my answer. My answer should be the right answer. It's helping you make a decision for yourself. Another one is telling you that not taking action to work with them is evidence of not trusting yourself. No one can tell you what is evidence of not trusting yourself. You know if you're trusting yourself. And if somebody is pushing that button of, like, well, I don't think you're trusting yourself. Oh my goodness. No, run far, far away. Because that is, they want trusting them to mean trusting you, which is not necessarily the same thing. Your trusting me does not equal you trusting you. There are two separate things. Rushing decisions. I'm a big advocate of giving space to decisions. Now, if you have been processing this for a while and you're like, I just need a little encouragement or a little push forward, or like, yes, what I hear is that you want this. What would need to be true for you to say yes? That's different than saying, this is now, or it's closed, or this is the only time you can get it for the smaller amount of money, or like any of those playing on your sense of lack. Big decisions deserve space. You may stretch your comfort zone, and comfort zone stretching can be important. Not always. Sometimes we're pushed to stretch our comfort zone when actually a different decision could allow us to play powerfully within what feels aligned for us that isn't beyond our comfort zone. I think there's a lot of emphasis put on comfort zone stretching as being the way to do it. It can be. It is a way. Doing something different if you want a different result is important, and that can feel uncomfortable, which is stretching your comfort zone. But it doesn't have to be as intense as sometimes we are led to think that it needs to be. So like saying, hey, your success is on the other side of your comfort zone, so you need to spend a lot more money than you're comfortable with to do the thing. Maybe not. And nobody else can tell you that that's the most loving decision for you. And again, I really hate using the right decision. I know a lot of people use it, and that's part of what this is about. But most loving decision is not always going to produce the result that you expect. But if you are making the next best choice and then giving space to learn from that decision, you will grow and it will move you forward. Anyone who's telling you to trust their process, just trust the process, just do the work and it'll work out. Trust your process. And that's what we're talking about, is how do you build trust in your process? And then, of course, all obstacles are mindset obstacles. That's not entirely true. There are plenty of obstacles that are not mindset obstacles, that are real things outside of ourselves, resources, the amount of energy you have, the amount of money you have, the amount of time you have, the amount of education you have, or the knowledge in something, the amount of negative social dynamics that you're impacted by. All of those things play into your experience. Mindset can help you navigate the obstacles that you are faced with to achieving what you want, but they are not making those obstacles. They're just stopping you from navigating them as well as you might otherwise. So, trusting your process. How do you trust your process? I have talked a little bit about this, as I mentioned, in some other episodes, such as episode 23, How to Plan for the Future and Enjoy the Present, episode 14, Planting Seeds to Take Confident Action. But for just a brief look at some things that you can do to help build that self-trust so that you can step out of looking for other people to have your right answers and start to own your own answers. As I mentioned before, knowing yourself and your values as they stand now, giving yourself some space to explore those, to explore who you are and also who you want to be, knowing what you want. As I mentioned at the beginning of these coaching episodes, if you could have whatever you wanted, what would it be? What about that is important to you? What would that make true about you? What are the values that are emphasized within that? Lead with those things. Lead with what you want to be versus your fears. Now, this is something that often gets confused. There's a whole thing in my industry around this about people being afraid of COVID and letting that be the thing that stopped them from living their best life and all of that sort of stuff. And this is problematic because, again, it's other people judging what is you leading with who you want to be and what your values are and what's important to you. Because that can be a values decision, not necessarily a fear-based decision. It's a choice. Is it an active choice? Is it a conscious choice? Or is it a default choice? Is it a choice based in avoidance, which often leads to not choosing, as I mentioned before? So letting go of all of that noise and all of that judgment. Again, fear of other people judging you and negative stereotypes, especially the more you're surrounded by them and in particular situations, as well as, life or death decision-making, all of that can make decisions very heavy and harder. And there's a lot of that right now. So the heavier it is, the more space it deserves. Reframing uncomfortable is another piece. Being able to go, uncomfortable just means that it was uncomfortable. You get to look at what that means. So not telling stories about what it means to be uncomfortable. Something that can be uncomfortable is I didn't do a good job. Okay, well, define good. What is a good job? What made that not a good job? Did I have an impact that I didn't intend? Rather than doubling down and going, no, it was fine. I did fine. I did right. I am right. Taking it out of making a mistake makes me a mistake and going, I'm not a mistake, but I can make a mistake that I can then learn from. What does it take to learn from that? Well, it takes asking questions and understanding what about that made it a mistake and what could I do differently next time? So again, affirming that self-trust through grace for growing and learning, as well as focusing on celebration of growth and what is success, defining success, but celebrating those things. We often don't give space for celebration. So actually giving space for celebration and looking and noticing those places where you stand back up after falling down. And one of the biggest pieces to developing self-trust around decision-making is practicing decision-making. If you struggle with making decisions and they often feel really heavy, even when they don't need to, practice making small decisions and affirming what you got from that decision, how that decision benefited you, how it taught you something, how it worked out, maybe in a way you didn't expect, but like what it led to, that would be the next thing. Every decision leads to another decision. And that can seem scary or that can seem empowering. And it really depends on the way you experience your own self and ability to trust yourself in decision-making. And another really key component within this that we super struggle with in the society is sharing and cultivating a community that supports that discernment versus making you reliant on their opinions. So a community that helps you listen, that helps you have a different perspective. And this also plays into making sure that your community has a diverse perspective, not just people who will say yes. And you're right. Not to say that having people who like cheer you on and say yes aren't important. They are. And having people who go, oh yeah, that didn't work out so well, but I believe in you and that you can do the next thing. And here's how I see this, and help you, or actually before they say, here's how I see this, would you like to hear how I see this? Are you interested in a different perspective? Asking instead of force helping. That's another piece. And I think that's also important in any kind of relationship, even when you've hired somebody to help you. Just like, you've married your spouse, doesn't mean that you want to do certain things all the time. You still want them to ask you. Same thing with someone that you've hired. A lot of times people are like, well, you hired me to tell you stuff and tell you what to do and give you the answers. So why aren't you taking it? Well, did you ask if I wanted that one? Like, just because I hired you does not mean that that's a given all the time. So really developing that respectful relationship that's not based on a hierarchical thinking is extremely important. And then staying curious. Back to exactly what you've heard me do multiple times, asking questions, exploring information, moving your mind. If you listened to the episode with Naomi Gottlieb Miller a few episodes back, really being able to lean into not just your physical movement, but your mental movement, and considering and thinking about things and having space, not allowing things to attack your identity and you as a good person, because that will shut you down right away. But being able to go, okay, I trust myself. I love myself. I am worthy. I'm valuable, and I can learn and grow, which is essentially owning your humanity. Back to, I can make mistakes, and those mistakes don't make me a mistake. But what I do with them, the decisions that I make from them, build who I am in the world. And so you can make a different choice. Finally, just to reiterate, if you make reactive decisions, those decisions where you didn't make a decision, you just let something happen, it doesn't feel like you made a decision. And so you can't learn from those decisions because you can't learn from decisions you didn't make. So yes, decision-making involves risk. It does. And so trusting yourself to make a decision does not mean that you will make a decision that you are 100% happy with what happens from that decision. What it does mean is that you trust yourself to make a decision and grow from that decision, to move forward from that decision. And that means making conscious decisions, which gives you the power in your own life. So building that self-trust, take a look at those places where you've grown. Recognize those things that you have done and believe that you can do, and have the support to do those things. Again, that's not necessarily someone that you pay, but someone who does coaching can certainly help you make those decisions. Make sure that it's someone who is helping you make your decisions, not do the things that are their decisions. It's so important because you are you. You are the only person who knows what is loving for you, who knows what is right for you in this moment. If you want support to access that faster, that's where someone like me comes in, helping you develop that ability to be resilient as you make decisions, to trust yourself, to keep getting back up and doing the next thing and learning and growing and building in your own life so that you can make the impact that you want to make, and so that you can also enjoy the process, have fun in the process. And having people around you also makes it a little bit less heavy because you have people to help hold you up as you make decisions. So if you would like support with that, I'm here for you. And I invite you to get on a call. As I mentioned through this, my mode when we talk is not to make a decision for you. It's not to push you into a decision. It is to help you make a decision that fits for you. So if we get on this call, the main part of the call is me asking you questions and helping you make a decision that fits for you. Of course, it involves, sharing information about what the process looks like, how I work, all of those things. But it's not to make a decision for you. It's not to push you into anything or think that I know your answers. It is to help you find your answers for yourself. So go practice some decision making. I believe in you. I think you're amazing. And I will talk to you all next time. Thanks for listening. I so appreciate you being here. If you got something out of today's episode, please share it. Leave me a review, take a screenshot, and post it on social with a shout out to me. Send it to a friend or, all of the above. Want to hang out more? Join me on Instagram. Or better yet, get on my mailing list to make sure you don't miss out on anything. And remember, your possibilities are as unlimited as you are. Allow yourself to shine, my friend. The world needs your light. See you next time.